The galaxy was calm for many years. Countless worlds lived in peace, sending songs of life through the endless dark. The stars shone quietly, watching civilizations grow and trade, learn and dream. It was a time when most races had forgotten what war truly meant. But peace never lasts forever. It happened suddenly without warning, one faint signal trembling through the cosmic silence. A cry for help. It came from a small shining blue planet called Orath, a world known for its kind and gentle people. They were scholars, artists, and healers, not fighters. Their world was rich with forests and silver seas, a place where conflict had never taken root. They believed knowledge could solve all problems, that understanding could heal any wound. But when the darkness came for them, no wisdom could stop it. The message spread across the galactic network. It was broken and full of static, but every species understood the fear in that voice. The Orathians were under attack by an unknown enemy. Their message repeated the same desperate plea. "We are not soldiers. Please, someone help us." Every corner of the galaxy heard it, but few moved. Some governments argued that it wasn't their concern. Others feared that if they helped, they might become the next target. So the message drifted through the stars, ignored by most, fading with each passing hour. But it reached one world that could not ignore such a cry: Earth. On Earth, the signal arrived in the early hours of the morning, caught by deep space listeners who didn't yet know its meaning. When it was translated, the words silenced entire command centers. Humanity had long been known by a single name among the stars: the Deathworlders. It was not a title of pride, but of truth. Earth was a dangerous place full of beasts, storms, and poisons that had shaped humans into survivors. They were a species built by struggle. While others evolved in calm worlds, humanity grew in chaos. The galaxy both feared and respected them. When the transmission from Orath reached the Earth Defense Command, no one argued, no one hesitated. The council meeting was short, the decision simple: we go. The word spread through every base and fleet dock orbiting Earth. Soldiers stood ready before sunrise. Engineers began fueling ships. Families said goodbye, knowing that some would never return. To most humans, helping another species was not about politics, it was instinct. They couldn't stand by while innocents screamed for help. Across the blue oceans of Earth, every news broadcast carried the same image: a faint, blue planet glowing in the darkness, surrounded by shadows. The narrator's voice trembled as they described the Orathians' call for aid. People all around the world stopped what they were doing to listen. In that moment, something stirred deep within the hearts of billions. It wasn't anger or hatred, it was empathy. They could see themselves in those distant lives. They could imagine what it would be like if Earth cried out and no one came. That thought alone was enough to ignite action. Within days, the great human fleets began to gather. Spaceports lit up like stars as ships prepared for departure. Each vessel carried the marks of its home nation. Flags painted on armor, symbols of unity and strength. These weren't explorers or diplomats. These were warriors who had seen too many wars already. Yet this mission felt different. They weren't going to conquer. They were going to save. In the command deck of the flagship Valiant Dawn, Admiral Asha Khan watched the planet shrink below her as her ship rose toward the stars. She was a woman who had fought in countless battles, but this time, her heart felt heavier. The last message from Orath played again on the screens. A soft, trembling voice saying, "Please, we are dying." The Admiral clenched her fists. "No one dies alone," she whispered. Every soldier on board felt the same mix of emotions: fear, determination, and quiet anger at the thought of innocent lives being slaughtered. The fleet's medics prepared supplies while engineers checked the weapons again and again. There was a strange silence on every ship, the kind of silence that comes before something enormous. No one needed orders. They all knew what they had to do. Back on Earth, people watched their loved ones disappear into the sky. Children waved at the glowing trails left by the departing ships. Old veterans stood at attention, saluting the fleet that carried humanity's promise. News commentators tried to describe what was happening, calling it the March of the Deathworlders. But for the families left behind, it was simply heartbreak wrapped in pride. They knew the Deathworlders didn't go to start wars. They went to end them. As the fleet traveled through deep space, the soldiers trained constantly. Some watched old battle recordings to remind themselves of past victories. Others stared quietly out of the windows, watching stars drift by like ghosts. The distance to Orath was great. It would take days of travel through jump gates and warp corridors. In that time, the humans learned more about the Orathians. They were a small race, peaceful and fragile, living under twin suns. Their civilization had no army, no weapons strong enough to stop the invasion. It made the humans' hearts ache even more. They knew what kind of enemy would attack such a people, the kind that preyed on weakness. The commanders held nightly meetings to plan strategy, but more than tactics, they discussed how to minimize civilian losses. They wanted to save lives, not destroy everything. Humanity had learned that lesson the hard way through centuries of war. The young soldiers listened quietly, realizing that the fight ahead was not just for Orath. It was for what humanity stood for in the galaxy. In the lower decks of the Valiant Dawn, a young pilot named Marcus sat with his helmet in his lap. He looked at the stars beyond the glass and whispered, "You better hold on, Orath. We're coming." His words echoed what every soldier was thinking. Far away on the edge of the galaxy, the Orathians still sent their signal, weaker each hour. Their cities were burning, their skies filled with smoke. But somewhere deep in the black, their message finally reached hearts strong enough to answer. The galaxy was vast and cold, but in that emptiness the humans were moving fast, driven by something that no other race truly understood: human stubbornness, the refusal to let hope die. As the ships drew closer to their destination, their hulls glowed faintly from the jump energy. Each one carried thousands of lives ready to fight for strangers they had never met. The captains spoke to their crews, reminding them of why they were going. "Remember," one of them said, "we are not the monsters they think we are. We are the storm that protects the weak." The word spread through the fleet, lighting fires in tired hearts. In the quiet moments between jumps, soldiers shared stories of their families, their homes, and their fears. Some wrote messages to be sent home later. Others promised each other drinks when they returned, but no one truly believed it would be easy. Every man and woman on those ships knew that not all of them would come back. Still, no one complained. Humanity had always run toward danger, never away from it. When the final jump began, the fleet disappeared into a whirlpool of light. In that second, the stars stretched and vanished. And for the first time in a long while, the galaxy trembled, not because of war, but because of hope. A new kind of hope, born from a dangerous world and a brave species that refused to stay silent. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of most civilizations, the signal from Orath finally faded into silence. But before it vanished, the last thing it carried was a whisper. "Please." It didn't know that the answer was already on its way. The Deathworlders had heard the cry, and they were coming, bringing with them the fire and courage that had kept their own species alive for centuries. The galaxy had cried for help, and Earth had answered. While most of the galaxy was still busy with debates and politics, humanity had already begun to move. The signal from Orath had shaken the hearts of the Deathworlders, and now it had turned into something unstoppable. Inside the great war rooms of Earth's orbital stations, bright holographic maps filled the air. Every ship, every weapon, and every supply route was being prepared. It wasn't just a mission. It was a promise. The humans had decided that if no one else would answer the cry for help, they would. Across the world, news of the rescue mission filled every screen. The streets were full of people standing together, watching the sky. Factories that once built transport ships now built war carriers. Scientists worked around the clock to tune communication systems so that they could reach Orath faster. There was no time to waste. No one cared about politics or about who would take credit for the mission. They all knew what mattered most: saving lives. In the military base under the frozen ice of Antarctica, Captain Arjun Patel walked through a hallway glowing with blue lights. His soldiers stood in line wearing armor that shimmered with the Earth's flag. They were ready to fight, but their faces showed something deeper than courage. They carried the weight of what they were about to do. For many of them, this would be their first interstellar war. Still, none of them hesitated. They had been raised on a world where danger was part of life. Facing the unknown was almost natural to them. When the fleet finally left orbit, Earth looked peaceful from above. The oceans sparkled like blue glass and the clouds drifted lazily. For a moment, many soldiers watched silently from the observation decks. It was the home they might never see again. But every single one of them believed the same thing, that protecting others was worth the risk. The ships activated their engines and the stars stretched into long streaks of light. The fleet was on its way to Orath. During the journey, every ship became a world of its own. Thousands of humans worked, trained, and prepared together. In the medbay, doctors packed healing gel and synthetic blood, knowing they would need every drop. Engineers checked the fusion cores again and again, making sure nothing would fail in battle. Commanders studied data about the enemy. Strange ships with unknown technology, built for destruction rather than defense. But even with little information, the Deathworlders were confident. They had fought impossible wars before. In the crew quarters of the ship Iron Soul, a group of soldiers sat together, watching the hologram of Orath. The planet looked beautiful, covered in green continents and 2 shining moons. "Hard to believe it's burning right now," said one of them quietly. Another nodded. "That's why we're going." Their voices were calm, but their eyes burned with purpose. They didn't know who the enemy was, but they knew what they had to do. Back on the command ship Valiant Dawn, Admiral Asha Khan stood before her crew. Her voice carried through the speakers to every corner of the fleet. "We are not fighting for territory. We are not fighting for pride. We are fighting for life. Every second we wait, more innocent people die. We will not let that happen." Her words were met with silence first, then with thunderous applause. Even through space, the soldiers felt their blood burn with determination. The journey to Orath was long and dangerous. The fleet passed through asteroid fields and the glowing storms of ion space. At one point, a small scout ship went missing in a wormhole drift. Everyone feared the worst, but then the pilot's voice returned on the radio, laughing. "You'll have to try harder to lose me," he said. The fleet cheered. That kind of spirit kept them alive. As they moved closer to Orath's sector, they started picking up faint energy signals. The enemy was there, still attacking. Satellite scans showed burning cities and destroyed defense grids. The Orathians were trying to resist, but their technology was weak compared to the invaders. The human commanders exchanged worried looks. "We're late," one of them said quietly. But the admiral shook her head. "No, we're just in time." To prepare for battle, the soldiers were briefed on their mission. They would first clear the enemy ships in orbit, then land ground teams to help evacuate civilians. Special teams were assigned to rebuild communication networks on the surface. Every plan was made with one goal: to save as many lives as possible. "We're going to show them," said Captain Arjun. "We're going to show the galaxy what happens when Deathworlders fight for peace." The soldiers laughed quietly at his words. It was strange, the idea of humans being called Deathworlders. To them, it wasn't a name of fear anymore. It was a badge of strength, a reminder of where they came from. They had survived earthquakes, floods, diseases, and wars. Their world had taught them how to adapt, how to fight, and how to never give up. The enemy didn't know it yet, but they were about to meet a species that didn't understand the word surrender. Hours turned into days as the fleet got closer. The radio channels filled with silence, broken only by the sound of system updates. Many soldiers couldn't sleep. Some wrote letters to their families. Others cleaned their weapons or told jokes to calm their nerves. "Do you think the Orathians will even believe we came to help?" one young medic asked. Her partner smiled softly. "When they see us fighting for them, they'll believe." On the second week of travel, the fleet stopped at the edge of a dark nebula. The stars here were hidden behind thick clouds of dust. The admiral ordered the ships to power down for a moment, to remain invisible. From the darkness, they could see flashes of light ahead, traces of explosions around Orath. The battle was still going on. "They're still alive," said one officer. "Then we still have time," the admiral replied. At that moment, every soldier understood that the time for waiting was over. Engines roared to life again. The hum of reactors filled the ships. Missiles were loaded, shields charged, and pilots strapped into their fighters. The Deathworlders were ready. They were heading straight into a war zone to protect strangers, because that was what humanity did best. Before the final jump, Admiral Asha gave one last message. "When we arrive, there will be chaos. There will be fire. But remember who we are. We are from Earth, the world that never stops fighting. When others run, we advance. When others hide, we rise. And when someone cries for help, we answer." The words echoed through every hallway, every cabin, every heart. The fleet moved together, glowing against the blackness of space. To any observer, it looked like a small army compared to the massive enemy force waiting near Orath. But numbers didn't matter to the Deathworlders. They believed in their strength, in their machines, and in each other. They were not just soldiers, they were survivors. As the countdown for the final jump began, the crews held their breath. 3, 2, 1. The stars vanished in a blur, replaced by streaks of energy. In that instant, humanity crossed the final gate into Orath's system. The sight that met them was worse than they had imagined. The planet below was covered in smoke, its oceans reflecting red fire. Enemy ships circled it like wolves, firing endlessly into the cities. Even from orbit, the destruction was visible. The Deathworlders didn't hesitate. The Admiral raised her hand and gave the only order anyone wanted to hear. Engage. The fleet split into wings, every ship moving in perfect formation. Fighters launched like arrows from the carriers, their engines leaving trails of blue light. The silence of space was shattered by the thunder of human weapons. For the first time since the invasion began, the people of Orath looked up at the sky and saw something new. Hope. Down on the surface, the Orathians gathered in the ruins of their cities. They heard strange sounds in the air like thunder without rain. When they looked up, they saw bright flashes tearing through the clouds. Someone whispered, "They came." The Deathworlders came, and far above, in the chaos of space, humanity fought as one. The galaxy had waited too long to respond, but now the Deathworlders were here. Their engines burned brighter than the stars, and their hearts burned even brighter. The cry for help had been heard, and the answer had arrived with fire. When the Deathworlder fleet reached Orath, the planet was already burning. The skies glowed red with explosions, and black smoke covered half the world. From space, the humans could see fire spreading like veins through the cities below. The enemy ships surrounded the planet, massive and dark, shaped like claws gripping their prey. They fired without mercy, destroying anything that moved. The peaceful Orathians had no defense left. Their airfields were in ruins, and their last message had gone silent days ago. Humanity had arrived just in time, but the scene that met them filled every soldier with cold anger. On the bridge of the Valiant Dawn, Admiral Asha Khan stared at the battle through the viewing glass. Her voice was calm but heavy. "All ships prepare for combat," she ordered. "No warnings, no messages. The time for words is over." The communication officers sent the command, and within moments the Deathworlder fleet came alive. The engines flared bright blue. Weapons powered up, and the blackness of space filled with movement. Humanity was ready to fight. The first human volley hit before the enemy even realized they were there. Giant plasma cannons fired beams that tore through the enemy's outer ships. Explosions bloomed like suns across the void. The invaders scrambled to return fire, but the humans had already spread into formation, using speed and chaos as their advantage. The Iron Soul and Valiant Dawn led the front line, cutting through the enemy's blockade like blades of light. For every human ship that took damage, 2 enemy ships fell apart. In the fighter bays, pilots rushed into their cockpits. The hangar shook with the thunder of engines as small attack crafts launched one after another. They flew through debris and enemy fire, weaving like silver comets. "For Orath!" One pilot shouted over the radio, and others repeated it, turning the cry into a war song. It echoed through every frequency, a reminder of why they were there. Down on the planet's surface, the Orathians hid in shattered temples and underground shelters. They had accepted death, believing no help would come. But then through the smoke-filled sky, they saw blue light falling from the heavens. Dozens of drop pods streaked down, leaving trails of fire. The ground trembled as they landed. When the doors opened, armored human soldiers stepped out, weapons ready, scanning for survivors and enemies. To the Orathians, they looked like creatures of myth, beings born of fire and steel. But when one soldier removed his helmet and smiled, offering a hand to help a wounded child, they realized the truth. These were not gods. They were humans, and they had come to save them. The battle raged everywhere. In the skies, dogfights tore through the clouds, leaving burning wrecks falling into the oceans. On the ground, human troops fought street by street, clearing buildings and rescuing civilians. The enemy soldiers, tall and insect-like with metallic armor, fought fiercely. Their weapons fired streams of plasma that could melt stone. But the Deathworlders were not afraid. They had fought deadlier things on their own world, storms, beasts, and each other. Every time one human fell, another stepped forward. Captain Arjun Patel led a ground team through the ruins of the Orathian capital. His armor was scratched, his rifle hot from firing. "Keep moving," he shouted. "Protect the civilians." Around him, Soldiers dragged injured Orathians to safety while covering fire rained down from rooftops. In one corner of a broken plaza, a group of Orathian children hid behind a fallen statue. Arjun knelt beside them and handed one a small device that projected a shield of light. "Stay under this," he said softly. "You'll be safe." The child, trembling, whispered, "Why are you helping us?" Arjun smiled. "Because someone has to." High above, in orbit, the human fleet continued its relentless attack. The Valiant Dawn fired its main cannon, shattering an enemy battleship in a single blast. Cheers erupted through the communication lines, but they were short-lived. A counterattack came almost immediately. 3 enemy cruisers broke formation and targeted the human flagship. Their plasma beams hit the ship's shields, causing alarms to scream. "Brace for impact," shouted the admiral. The Valiant Dawn shuddered violently, metal screeching, but the humans did not fall back. Instead, they fought harder. "Return fire," Asha commanded. "Make them remember us." The retaliation was brutal. Missiles launched from hidden ports, piercing through the enemy ships like arrows. One after another, they exploded into flaming dust. The bridge crew erupted in relief. They were bleeding, but they were still standing. Down below, the ground war reached its peak. Entire city blocks turned into battlegrounds. Human mechs, giant armored walkers, marched through the streets, firing cannons that sent shockwaves through the ruins. The Orathians watched in awe as the Deathworlders fought not like soldiers, but like protectors possessed by fury. One mech operator named Lena shouted through her comms, "We hold this ground or die trying." Her machine crushed through enemy defenses, clearing a path for civilians to escape. Everywhere, the enemy began to falter. They had never faced warriors like these before. The humans didn't fight for conquest. They fought for life. The invaders could not understand that kind of strength. Their lines broke. Ships fled. Their leaders screamed orders that went unanswered. But victory came at a cost. Entire units of human soldiers were wiped out in the first day. The hospitals on the ground overflowed with the wounded. Medics worked without rest, using whatever they had to keep people alive. A young medic named Eva cried quietly as she tried to save a soldier whose armor was burned through. "Stay with me," she whispered, holding his hand. He looked at her, weakly smiled, and said, "Did we win?" before closing his eyes forever. The next morning, the battle still raged, but something had changed. The enemy's attacks were weaker, their formations broken. The Deathworlders had taken control of the orbital zone and now bombarded the enemy bases from above. The sky glowed with the light of falling fire. Each strike shook the planet, but this time, it was the invaders who felt fear. As the humans pushed forward, they reached the main enemy fortress on the northern continent. The structure was huge, black, and pulsing with strange energy. Admiral Asha gave the order. "End this." The final assault began. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon was focused on that one target. Explosions lit the sky as human dropships surrounded the fortress. Captain Arjun's unit was among the first to enter. Inside, they found the enemy commander, a towering creature with eyes like burning coals. It roared and attacked with energy blades, but Arjun dodged and fired. The creature fell after a fierce fight, its weapon clattering to the floor. Silence filled the room. The war, at least on the ground, was over. Outside, the Orathians emerged from their shelters, blinking in the light of the new dawn. The air still smelled of smoke, but the sky was clear for the first time in weeks. Human soldiers stood among the ruins, tired and battered, but victorious. Some knelt beside the wounded. Others looked up at the sky where the last enemy ship exploded in a final burst of light. One Orathian elder approached Admiral Asha, who had come down from her ship. Her armor was scarred, her face streaked with soot. The elder bowed deeply. "We have no words to thank you," he said. Asha shook her head. "You don't owe us anything," she replied. "We just did what had to be done." Around them, the surviving soldiers began helping rebuild walls, carrying supplies and comforting children. The Orathians watched, amazed. These humans, these Deathworlders, were not what the galaxy had said they were. They were not monsters or conquerors. They were protectors. That night, fires burned across the ruins, not from destruction but from warmth. The soldiers shared food with the Orathians, sitting together under the strange twin moons. Some laughed softly, others stared quietly at the stars. Many had lost friends that day, but they knew it had been worth it. Somewhere far above, the Valiant Dawn drifted in orbit, its lights flickering like a guardian watching over them. The battle for Orath had ended, but the story was only beginning. The galaxy had seen what the Deathworlders could do when someone cried for help. They fought not for power, but for hope. They brought both fire and salvation, and though the price had been high, the Deathworlders had proven one thing beyond doubt. They were the kind of warriors the stars would never forget. The fires on Orath slowly began to fade, leaving behind smoke, silence, and sorrow. The war was over, but the air still smelled like burnt metal and dust. The once beautiful cities were broken into pieces. Tall glass towers now lay scattered like bones across the land. The oceans had turned dark from falling ash. Even the wind seemed tired, carrying whispers of what had happened. The Deathworlders had won, but victory felt heavy. For every cheer that rose in the camps, there were tears for the ones who didn't return. In the middle of the ruin stood Admiral Asha Khan. Her armor was scratched, her face pale from exhaustion, but her eyes still burned with strength. Around her, medics worked day and night to treat the wounded. Soldiers carried supplies, built shelters, and helped the Orathians rebuild their homes. The humans were not celebrating, they were mourning and healing. The price of saving a world had been paid in blood, and they could feel it in every heartbeat. Captain Arjun Patel walked through what was once the capital city. The streets were covered in rubble, and the air buzzed with quiet sadness. He stepped over a broken sign written in the Orathian language and looked around. There were children searching for their parents, elders lighting candles for the dead, and soldiers carrying their fallen comrades wrapped in flags. Everywhere he looked, there were stories of loss. A young Orathian woman ran to him, tears in her eyes, and said, "Thank you. You came when no one else did." Arjun wanted to smile, but he couldn't. He just nodded. The words felt too heavy for his throat. In the command tent, reports came in from across the planet. The enemy ships were gone. The skies were clear. But thousands of people were still missing. Entire towns had been erased. The humans began digging through debris, searching for survivors. They didn't stop, even when exhaustion took over. They were Deathworlders, born to fight until the very end. The Orathians were amazed by how the humans worked. They saw soldiers covered in mud and blood, still smiling at children, still offering food and water to strangers. They watched as human engineers repaired generators using scrap parts and as doctors created makeshift hospitals from wrecked ships. It was then the Orathians began to understand what made these humans different. They had seen destruction before, but never this kind of compassion inside the fire. One evening, as the two sons of Orath set over the horizon, Admiral Asha gathered her officers. The orange light painted their tired faces with warmth. "We did what we came to do," she said softly. "But now comes the hardest part, leaving." Her voice cracked slightly as she looked at the empty chairs of those who had died in battle. "We'll honor them properly when we return home. For now, their mission lives through us." Captain Arjun spoke next, his voice steady but filled with pain. "They died protecting people they'd never met. That's the kind of story the galaxy should remember." The room fell silent. No one needed to say anything more. They all knew the truth. This victory would never feel like triumph. It would always carry the shadow of loss. Outside, the Orathians began building small shrines at the edges of the battlefields. Each shrine had the name of a human carved into the stone, glowing softly in the night. They called them Stars of Courage. The humans didn't ask for this tribute, but it touched every heart that saw it. Even the toughest soldiers, the ones who rarely showed emotion, found themselves standing before those stones in silence, remembering friends who would never laugh again. Eva, the young medic who had held the dying soldier in her arms during the battle, now worked in a field hospital surrounded by hundreds of wounded. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of those she couldn't save. One night, an Orathian nurse came to her and said, "You gave us life again. Please rest." Eva shook her head. "Not yet. Not until everyone else is safe." That was the spirit of the Deathworlders, never stopping even when their hearts were breaking. As days passed, small signs of recovery began to appear. The Orathians started planting new crops in the blackened soil. Children laughed again for the first time in weeks. Human engineers helped repair communication systems so the Orathians could send messages to their other colonies. The planet was breathing again, slowly but surely. Yet inside every human there was still a quiet sadness. They had seen too much. On the ship Valiant Dawn, the memorial room was filled with flickering candles. The names of the fallen glowed on a metal wall. Each soldier came to stand before it, sometimes speaking softly, sometimes saying nothing at all. They didn't need grand ceremonies. Just silence, just memory. Admiral Asha visited the room every night. She would stand in front of the names and whisper, "You did not die in vain." It became a ritual for her, a way to remind herself that even in loss, there was purpose. The Orathians often saw her walking through the ruins during the evenings, speaking with survivors and helping to lift debris with her own hands. They began calling her the Flame That Walks, a name of respect and love. Then came the day of farewell. After weeks of rebuilding and healing, it was time for the Deathworlders to return home. The ships were repaired and refueled. The wounded who could travel were loaded aboard. The Orathians gathered near the launch fields to see them off. Their leader, an old man with silver skin and bright eyes, stood before Admiral Asha. He placed a glowing stone in her hand, a traditional Orathian gift. "So that you may always carry our light," he said. She closed her fingers around it and replied, "Keep your light burning. We'll be watching the stars." Before leaving, Captain Arjun walked once more through the streets of the capital. The city was still broken, but life had returned to it. He saw children playing beside walls covered in human and Orathian handprints, a new tradition born from the bond they now shared. An Orathian girl ran to him and handed him a small flower that had grown between the cracks. "For your people," she said. Arjun smiled, this time with warmth. "We'll never forget you," he promised. As the fleet prepared for takeoff, the Orathians raised their voices in song. Their melody filled the air, soft and full of hope. It was their way of saying thank you. The humans listened in silence, their hearts full. Some cried quietly, others saluted. The engines roared to life, shaking the ground, and slowly the ships began to rise. From above, the Deathworlders looked down one last time at the world they had saved. The scars of war were still there, but so was the light of recovery. They had come to answer a cry for help, and now that cry had turned into a song of life. On the valiant dawn, Admiral Asha stood by the window, watching Aurath grow smaller. Captain Arjun joined her. "Do you think the galaxy will ever understand us?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but they'll remember." As the ships entered the silence of space, messages began to flood in from other systems. Word of what the humans had done was spreading, how they had crossed the stars, fought an impossible war, and saved a peaceful people when no one else dared. Some called them heroes. Others still called them Deathworlders, but now that name meant something different. It meant protectors, guardians. For the soldiers who had survived, there was no sense of pride, only reflection. They carried with them memories of laughter, fear, and sacrifice. They knew they had changed the galaxy in ways words could not describe. Humanity had proven that even those born from a harsh world could bring hope to others. When the fleet finally disappeared into the blackness of space, the Orathians continued to sing. They lit beacons in the mountains and by the seas, each one glowing bright enough to be seen from orbit. Those lights became symbols of unity, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, someone would always answer a cry for help. And somewhere deep inside every Deathworlder's heart, a quiet truth lived on. Peace was not won through fear or power, but through courage and compassion. They had paid a heavy price, but they had also lit a flame that would never die. Months passed after the Deathworlders left Aurath, but their presence never faded from the hearts of the people they had saved. The cities were slowly coming back to life. The broken towers were being rebuilt, and the skies that once burned red with fire were now blue again. Children who had once hidden underground now played in the open fields, their laughter echoing through the air. The wounds of war were healing not only on the land but also in the souls of the people. Yet far away among the stars, the Deathworlders were facing their own silent battles, the ones inside their hearts. On board the Valiant Dawn, Admiral Asha Khan sat in her command chair, staring out into the endless darkness of space. The stars looked peaceful, but for her they carried memories, each one reminding her of a face she had lost, a soldier who never came home. The ship was quiet. Only the soft hum of the engines could be heard. The war was over, but the weight of what they had done still lingered. Saving Aurath had cost them dearly. Every crew member carried invisible scars, and no metal or speech could heal them. Captain Arjun Patel walked through the ship's corridors, his boots making soft echoes. Everywhere he looked, he saw signs of the struggle to move on. Some soldiers laughed quietly, pretending everything was fine. Others sat alone, staring at the floor, lost in thoughts that words could not reach. He stopped by the memorial wall again. Hundreds of names were engraved there. He touched one of them gently and whispered, "You're home now." For a moment he stood in silence, feeling the memories rush back, the battle, the screams, the smell of smoke. Then he straightened up and walked away, carrying the strength his fallen friends had given him. The ship eventually reached Earth. From orbit, the planet looked like a glowing blue jewel surrounded by darkness. As they descended, every survivor felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, pride, and guilt. The landing zone was filled with families waiting to greet them. Cheers erupted as the soldiers stepped out, but the ones returning didn't feel like heroes. They felt like people who had simply done what had to be done. Admiral Asha walked down the ramp slowly. Her armor scratched, her eyes tired. A small boy ran up to her and handed her a white flower. "For the ones who couldn't come back," he said shyly. She knelt down, smiled faintly, and replied, "Thank you, little one. I'll keep it safe." After the ceremonies and reports were over, the soldiers went back to their homes. But peace was not easy for them. At night, they still heard the echoes of battle. Some dreamed of the burning skies of Arath. Others saw faces they couldn't forget. Yet despite the pain, they found strength in each other. They met often, in quiet gatherings in parks and old cafes, to talk, to remember, and to heal. They knew that sharing their stories was the only way to make peace with their memories. Meanwhile, on Orath, life was beginning to bloom again. The Orathians had rebuilt much of their capital and had even started a new tradition, a festival called Day of the Flame. Every year, they lit hundreds of lanterns and released them into the sky to honor the Deathworlders. Children were told stories of the humans who came from a harsh planet to save them. Stories of courage, kindness, and sacrifice. The shrines built in their memory were now sacred places where people came to pray for strength. The glowing stones engraved with human names shone brightly every night, like stars that refused to fade. One day a message reached Earth from Orath. It was addressed to Admiral Asha. The message carried images of the rebuilt cities, of smiling faces, and of the glowing shrines. There was also a video, an Orathian child standing before the shrine saying, "We remember you. You are part of our stars now." When Asha watched it, her eyes filled with tears. She called Arjun and the others to the briefing room. Together, they watched the message again in silence. When it ended, no one spoke for a long time. Finally, Arjun said softly, "Looks like the galaxy hasn't forgotten us after all." Asha smiled faintly. "We didn't fight for them to remember us," she said, "but it's good to know they do." Time moved on. The galaxy slowly healed from its chaos, but something had changed forever. The story of the Deathworlders spread far beyond Orath. Across distant planets, their name became a symbol of hope and bravery. They were no longer seen as dangerous savages from a deadly planet, but as protectors, beings who carried fire not to destroy, but to defend. Many civilizations began to reach out to humanity, wanting to learn from them, wanting to understand how a species so fierce could also be so full of compassion. On Earth, the soldiers of the Orath mission became teachers and leaders. Some joined peacekeeping groups, others helped rebuild war-torn worlds. Captain Arjun started a program to train new cadets, not just in combat, but in empathy and unity. "We don't fight because we love war," he would tell them. "We fight because someone has to stand up when the galaxy cries for help." His words became part of the Academy's oath, repeated by every new recruit. Admiral Asha, meanwhile, spent her remaining years guiding the next generation of commanders. She rarely spoke about Arath, but whenever she did, her voice softened. She would tell young officers, "There will come a day when someone calls for help. You may be afraid, you may be tired, but remember this. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the will to act despite it." Those who served under her never forgot those words. One evening, many years later, Asha stood alone on a balcony overlooking the sea. The stars above shimmered brightly, and among them, she imagined she could see Orath, distant but glowing. She held the same glowing stone the Orathian leader had given her all those years ago. It still shone faintly in her hand. She smiled and whispered, "We kept our promise." The waves below whispered back softly as if answering her, Far away on Orath, the same night sky sparkled above a world full of life. Children looked up and pointed to the stars, asking their parents which one was the home of the humans. The parents would smile and say, "It's far away," but their light reaches us every night. The legend of the Deathworlders became a story told for generations, a story of how strength and kindness could exist together, of how warriors from a world of storms became guardians of peace. Years turned into decades and the galaxy changed. New alliances were formed, wars were prevented before they began, and the memory of the dark times grew faint. Yet the tale of Orath and the Deathworlders never disappeared. In every corner of space there was someone who remembered, a pilot who had read about them, a scientist who studied their courage, a child who dreamed of joining them one day. And somewhere in that vast galaxy another world cried for help. The signal traveled through the void, faint but clear. In a command center on a distant colony, an officer picked up the signal and looked at the old emblem of the Deathworlders on the wall, a symbol of fire and hope. She smiled and whispered, "Let's answer the call." The engines of the fleet roared to life once more, shaking the stars awake. Humanity was ready again. Back on Earth at the monument of the fallen heroes, flowers were placed every day. A plaque read, "When the galaxy cried for help, they answered with fire and heart." People from all over came to see it, to remember that even in the coldness of space, there had been warmth, the warmth of those who dared to care. As the sun rose, its light touched the monument, making the engraved names shimmer like stars. Somewhere, perhaps in another world, another life, the spirits of the fallen Deathworlders watched over the galaxy they had once saved. They had come from a world of storms, but they had left behind a legacy of peace, and as long as there were stars, their story would never end.